Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity work, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're always about the positivity here on the show, and with me right now I've got a very special guest. He has worked for numerous wrestling promotions such as World Championship Wrestling, WCW and New Japan Pro Wrestling, NJPW. And I'm very happy to talk with him today. He's got a great story. The one, the only, Jeff Farmer has joined the show. Welcome, Jeff, to Wrestling with Heart.
Thank you, Stanley, for having me on the program.
Yes. So tell me about your childhood. Where'd you grow up?
Well, I have a very interesting childhood, actually, that you bring that up. My family's from Massachusetts. My father was a teacher and a coach, and but I grew up really in Central Florida, and we lived on a bus, believe it or not. I'm one of six kids, and my parents, and at one point we lived on a bus, like a converted, not a school bus, it was an X-ray bus, and we lived on a boat. And so I had a very, very kind of unorthodox or unusual upbringing, but we had, a lot of love in the house and not in the house, in the bus or the boat, I should say. And we were expected to perform at a high level academically, as my father was an educator, and and sports. He was also a big time athlete. So yeah, we had a lot of really good influence. And I think that really molded me and my siblings quite a bit and kind of pushed us, because we didn't have some of the creature comforts and things that were, everybody else was used to. So in a way, we were kind of used to doing without. And that kind of prepares you, believe it or not, for the wrestling business because it's a very kind of strange occupation to be in.
Yes, it's very hard, especially nowadays to really break in. But the good thing is like there's so many different companies out there now to cut your teeth and really grind and get that hustle going because the more stars you create, the better opportunities you have. So it's really incredible to see how it's evolved and progressed over
Yeah,
time.
yeah, that's for sure. I started in the 90s, so I started it was the industry was pretty tough back then. You really had to know someone almost or be so a lot of nepotism. You had to have a family member maybe in there or know somebody to even get a chance to get into pro wrestling at that time. And you had to have a certain look. Fortunately, I was a football player and I did some bodybuilding, amateur bodybuilding as a teen and had always been interested in exercise and weightlifting and sports. And, of course, a Schwarzenegger fan, as every kid my age was at that time. So, having that, advantage to be in sports, but breaking in the business was not easy. And, luckily we got in with, I knew Scott Hall. He was from the same town as me. We weren't friends or anything like that, but I knew him and asked him one time. I saw him at a gym. We were at Orange Avenue Gym, one of the oldest gyms in the country in Orlando. And just kind of said, hey, kind of what do we do to get in? And he really wasn't, to be honest, all that helpful because he did, it was very competitive, and you don't really want a lot of people coming into your business and taking your jobs. So, but we ended up getting into Steve Kern's school in Tampa, Florida. He had a school over there off of Tyson Drive, which was a big warehouse that I think was run by the Briscoes, if I'm not mistaken, at that time. And Steve was there with Jimmy Backlund and Ron Slinker and some kind of notable. The Nasty Boys came out of there, and we actually started our training there in Tampa.
Before we get into the wrestling aspect of everything, what was it about athletics that just was was like an escape for you? What was it
Yeah,
about it?
that's a great question, and it really was an escape. So one of the things, when you're living on a bus with eight people, you need to you don't have any room, you don't have anywhere to go sometimes. So sports was an outlet, and definitely an outlet for me with frustration and a lot of angst as a teen, as most teens have growing up, and that was a way for me to kind of express that and let that out. And it just so happened that football was the biggest sport in the little town. It's kind of like Friday Night Lights in Texas, so it was big in this part of Florida. And so all the cool guys got into football, and that's how you got the girls. And so I went into football too, and ended up, we had a good football program, and I played. For college, I played at Central Florida, University of Central Florida, as a linebacker and defensive end there. Thought I was going to go into the NFL, was kind of scouted, but nothing really happened. And then was working in a gym, really. I was a personal trainer, still had that whole, interest in exercise and fitness and wellness. And then it actually was my best friend, Clark Haynes, who was my tag team partner, Thunder, and I were both trainers at a training place, and he said, "Hey, let's do this professional wrestling. You want to try it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure," because I watched a little bit of wrestling growing up, like World Championship. It wasn't World Championship Wrestling back then. It was Florida Championship Wrestling. And I watched some of that with Gordon Soley, and Dusty was in there and some other people. And we used to kind of play around with some moves, but I really wasn't a pro wrestling fan. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, I want to do this. It was just really out of sheer coincidence that we decided to do it. And we went down to the school in Tampa and tried out. And then from then, I stayed in it. But it wasn't like something I mean, I'd always been into sports, but I just wasn't really necessarily. I amateur wrestled in high school, but I amateur wrestled in high school just to really stay in shape for football. My coach said, "Hey, I want you to wrestle," and I wrestled, and I liked wrestling. Amateur wrestling was I did learn a lot and it was good, but I did it to stay in shape and did it kind of for football. And when I went into pro wrestling, it was, and to be honest with you, I really was convinced that pro wrestling was real, and that there was and it is very physical and it's real. I'm not saying it's not real. It's very hard to explain, and we can talk about it if you want. But at
Mhm.
the time when I got into it, I'm thinking, okay, and it was as athletic as I felt I was as a linebacker. You had to be pretty athletic in that position. Pro wrestling was one of the most challenging physical things to do because in football you can just let it all out. You can hit someone as hard as you can, right? In pro wrestling, if I hit you as hard as I can, we're not going to have a match after that. So you have to learn how to how to kind of work with someone in a way that you're looking as physical as you can, but you're not hurting them literally, right? And so
Yeah.
that's harder than you think. It's like it's very complicated and it's hard to explain to people. It's physical and you can't defy gravity. If someone picks you up and slams you, you can't make that look any less, right? But little tricks like tucking your chin so you don't bounce your head off the mat. You see guys slap the ring with their arms, kind of dissipate the blow, and learning how to fall and learning how to take the physical abuse. And it's like I used to tell people, if you jump out of an airplane with a parachute and you try to land on your legs, you're probably going to break your leg or twist an ankle or whatever because you don't know how to hit and roll, but they teach you that in the military. I wasn't in the military, although I played Cobra, but you have to learn how to take the fall. You have to learn how to take the bump, in a certain way. And that's training, and you have to learn how to do that. So it's complicated.
Was there any words of wisdom or pieces of advice from your trainers that still stick with you today post wrestling?
Arn Anderson, I was fortunate. I was really in a position where, Blackjack Mulligan, and, not only Steve Kern, who I broke in with, but, a lot of these legends, guys that when I got into WCW, I knew Blackjack before WCW. He was a mentor. Masa Saito in Japan, we can talk about that. That's a whole nother story for me, having him as a mentor. But having guys that knew the business, were in the business for a long time, old school guys. They were the ones that if they were kind enough or liked you enough to tell you something like that, it stuck with you. And Arn and gave me some great advice about, because I remember at the time I was worried about getting exposure and wasn't being used properly and all this stuff, which is probably the complaint of most wrestlers unless you're on top. And he's like, hey kid, he goes, it's not just think about how long you can do it and longevity and stay in the business and kind of keep your nose down and just stay here and keep your job and don't, if you're looking for the top position, that's everybody wants that. So it's going to be very easy for you to be kind of swiped away from that and somebody else come up. But if you're down in the middle section and you're kind of agreeing with what's going on and doing your job, you can kind of hang in there and have a long career. And that was great advice. And actually, I ended up having a long career in pro wrestling. It was the only job I did for like 12 years. So kind of under the radar. A lot of people don't even know who I am or what I was able to do. In Japan, I definitely had more of an impact because that was something where there wasn't all of the politics and all of the office stuff in Japan, which was one of the great things about working for that company.
Yeah, there's a lot of differences about wrestling overseas versus wrestling in the United States because crowds are different
Yep.
wherever you
It's
go.
it's definitely different. The first of all, the wrestling style is different. It's more physical, right? They don't like, in the United States we have, in other places we have, they were called squash matches, really, which was just a match where you have an enhancement guy that makes the other guy, your main star, look really good, right? And this, you did this, you made him look good, and then he wrestled somebody competitive, and you had a good match, or he ended up losing to the person that they were trying to, whatever that is. And in Japan, they don't like those kind of matches at all, and they really don't use them. They want to fight, they want a battle, they want a competitive match. So when you do those matches, there's no night off really, like in a way where you're saying, okay, this is going to be easy. I'm going to go out there and bounce this guy around and get out of here. That doesn't happen in Japan. They expect you to work and you work hard and your matches, are 15, 20, 25, 30 minutes, long and you have to work. And the nice thing about that was that physical style when I first got in there, I mean, when I really first broke into wrestling, I was very physical style, and then I learned how to soften up and work a little bit and all that. And when I went back to Japan, it was like going back to when I first started a little bit more physical, and that's what they wanted. And I just gravitated towards that style in Japan and just was able to kind of be able to do that. Just I think it was because of, as an athlete and football, that was a nice transition. And there's a lot of guys in the wrestling business like Ron Simmons, who was an All-American, and an amazing wrestler, and guys that make that crossover from football, Jim Duggan, there's tons of them. Or from amateur wrestling, and that's harder, I think. So amateur wrestlers have a harder time making that transition. There's guys that do it, like Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar, that did amazing jobs from coming from amateur. Even Brad Rheingans, if you talk about him in New Japan, there's guys that had either amateur wrestling or judo that were able to make the transition. But a lot of people in those fields can't do it very well.
Yeah, I mean, you have to really work at it like constantly to
You,
perfect it. It's a
you
craft.
do, and it's something that and for me, I think being athletic was a plus, and even playing football, I didn't really try that hard. Even pro wrestling, I didn't try that hard, like to really work on my craft. I just went out there and worked hard. But yeah, you have I didn't get good until I was years into New Japan because you have to wrestle every night. You have to do it and do it and do it and do it until it just becomes part of your ability to just do it. And the only way you can get that is from doing the reps in the ring. And I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds of matches. And I remember when we started, Clark and I, when we were a tag team, we were watching the Road Warriors and the Steiners and all these tag teams, and we're picking up from what we like from them. We're like, oh, that was cool. Let's try this. And we literally would, in a way, sometimes almost write out the match, like say, hey, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that. And it wasn't until later that we learned how to really work and say, hey, you can't just schedule something and make it work. So that took years.
Yeah, putting the fundamentals together is very important, but it is a process.
Yeah, you can get out there, and guys like Flair, Rick is one of the best at doing this. And I learned this too, was just like
Hmm.
people are watching you. It's great if you can just execute a beautiful maneuver, right? Let's say a snap suplex, right? And guys like, Chris Benoit and other guys and Kurt Hennig, even Dean Malenko, you
The
had guys who were
technical
really
ones.
technical guys that could just beautifully execute something. But then you have the time from when you execute the move, getting up and moving around and going to pick the person up or whatever it may be. There's all of this time in between where people are watching you and they're seeing what you're doing, and you can't just be like a robot and go into the next move. You need to be able to express what you're doing in the ring, and almost if you're a heel, expressing that you're a heel, if you're a babyface, expressing that you're trying to stick to the rules and you just got shafted or just got, whatever, tricked by the bad guy. All of those things that you're portraying have to come out, and that takes skill.
Exactly. And you had mentioned a little bit ago you had some mentors in Japan that really gave you great advice.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, probably Black Cat, and a lot of, rest in peace. Black Cat, was just an amazing wrestler, an amazing friend, and a guy who, when the Guy Jings came in, he spoke English, he worked in Mexico, he worked in the US. He was a guy that just immediately took you under his wing and gave you help. And you find people like that every once in a while that are that rare, that are not selfish. It's not there's a lot of guys. The wrestling business is a very selfish business because it's a lot about self-promotion, keeping yourself up, and nobody's going to kind of help you. But you get these people every now and then that are that kind of person that just is there to help you and do what they can to make you better. And those, I was fortunate to have people like that. Masa Saito, Black Cat, Scott Norton, who I just got off the phone with, who has been a mentor for me and a great friend. And he was my tag team partner. And he's the one who really said, hey, this is what they want. This is what they want you to do. This is how you got to do it. This is what they're expecting. You need to do, X, Y, and Z. So I was lucky. I had the mentors like Jack Mulligan, Blackjack, and again Ole and Anderson and other people that were in there. But there's a few people that I can highlight. Masa Saito, of course, Black Cat, just people that said, "Hey, this is I'm helping you out," and that was a nice part of the business for me
Exactly.
because there's a lot of people that want to do the opposite, that are not sabotage you, but they don't want you taking their job or taking their position or taking their limelight. And unfortunately, there's not enough. This was a problem we had in WCW. We had so much great talent at the time that I was there in the mid 90s, or early 90s. So much talent, and there was only a limited amount of TV time. So the top guys, Hogan and Savage and all, they're getting the top, and Flair, and they should. They're getting the top time, right? They paid their dues. It's not that they shouldn't get it. They absolutely should. But by the time you got down, you had maybe one or two matches for the guys that were in my position. The actually was like Chris Jericho at the time. He was in that position. There's tons of guys. I have to think about everybody that was there, but there was a lot of guys that were at this kind of level that, at the end of the show, you're lucky if you got on the program. So it's very difficult. You can't get over if you don't have exposure.
Right. And sometimes it takes coming up with a really good gimmick to get over as
Yeah.
well.
And sometimes that's out of your control, and sometimes it is. I mean, we came up with Thunder and Lightning, Clark and I, and but they don't like that when you come up with your gimmick, and I'll tell you why. And it actually caused a big problem for us in WCW, and subsequently we were terminated or let go because we came up with Thunder and Lightning, and we had already had T-shirts made, and we had a fan following, and we had a logo design, and we were wrestling in Florida in a little independent wrestling promotion called the International Wrestling Federation, which was started in Orlando, and Jack was there, and some other people came in. But so we already had like all of our, what do you want to call that?
Your
Um,
gear,
yeah,
your
merchandise. Yeah, kind of
merch.
merchandise stuff that was ours. And so they're not going to say, "Hey, we got to pay you, to use your merchandise." They don't do that. And they're a business. So they're like, "Okay, we're going to rebrand you as this, or
Mhm.
now you're going to be this." And we own all of the rights to that. So when we sell your merchandise, yeah, we might give you a little something, but most of the rights and all of the grantees or whatever are for them. And so it causes problems if you kind of come up on your own. So that's why, and somebody like Vince McMahon, I was just watching some of that show on him. They made sure that they gave out the gimmick, for the wrestler, and they said, "Hey, we're going to put you in this. This is your outfit. This is your stuff." And therefore they own all the rights to that, all the likeness and the rights. If they make a doll, if they make a T-shirt, you might get a royalty check, but you're never going to be the one to benefit from all of that. That's how they are.
Yeah, I mean, it's just you have to really find ways to pick yourself up from that because it is tough out there to really get a character, continue to stay over, continue
Yep.
to win people over, but
Yep.
you have to keep on doing it. The cycle just has to keep going.
Yeah, it's
So,
hard because we had a booking committee and they came up with stuff and again, this is why Japan was so good for me because in the US, you had a booking committee and then there's wrestlers that influence that. They're buddies with these guys, so and so's buddies with so and so and I'm going to try to help you get a push. And if you're not in that and I really wasn't, I stayed, I mean I had friends in the business, but I wasn't I didn't have any connection, right? Or I had a father in the business or anybody, a brother or anybody in the business. I didn't have that kind of connection in the wrestling business. So yeah, it's difficult to get over, stay over, and do all of that. Now in Japan, what was nice was that you would go into the arena and your name is on the board, who you're wrestling, on a board. The whole show is listed, right, on a
mhm,
chalkboard or whatever
mhm.
whiteboard. And you see what that is. And you don't have to, there's no politics. You don't have to say, hey, they already do it and you just go in and you get your gear on and you go out and you work and you do a good job and you get done, and you're not having to worry about did I say hi to him this morning or did I not, was I not nice enough? Did he give me a dirty look or did I forget to, whatever. I mean, all the little politics that might go on. And I hated that part of the business, just the cliques and groups and who was groups with who. And of course, they're all competing for the top, exposure. So sometimes that was not fun to be a part of.
You know, one thing I found pretty fascinating about your career was getting to play the NWO Sting in WCW.
Yep.
How did that come about? Because you don't really get to see a lot of people really impersonate wrestlers and do it, and be known for that a lot of
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. So that was not my idea, of course. I was wrestling at the time as Cobra, and Cobra really wasn't going anywhere. Again, as I talked about, it was one of those things where I thought the character was okay. But and it was, and this could be my fault. I'm not blaming, the company, right? Maybe man, my interviews were so-so. I didn't really get a chance to really work on those, and I thought my wrestling was fair enough. But again, if you have the connection, you can get that development and get in, push up to that level, right? Well, Steve Austin was in WCW and I was there, and he was nothing like he ended up being, right? I mean, great talent, super good wrestler, right, and good on the mic, but he just wasn't being utilized properly in WCW. And when he got to the WWF, WWE, and he got Stone Cold Kimmick, and he'll be the first to tell you this, that's when he found his way. That's when he was like, oh man, this is me, this is how you do. And if they're not investing that time and money into figuring that out for you, you're going to get lost in the shuffle because there's other guys there too. So it's very, very difficult. But anyway, I was doing Cobra and they wanted to do this thing where the Sting went bad or whatever was that. And I think basically they kind of asked me because Steve and I were about the same size. I was a little bit heavier than him, but basically we were pretty similar in physique, right? So that was something that maybe we could pull off. And the Cobra thing wasn't going that well, so they asked me to do it, and I said, sure. I mean, of course, yeah, whatever you want. So they asked me, I did it, and I think also that the initial idea, and I don't know who was really making those decisions. Could have been Hogan, could have been Bischoff, could have, I don't know if there was a whole committee or Hall and Nash. I have no idea, but I think the original concept of that NWO Sting was to come out one time and just kind of cause all this chaos, right? And then, frame Steve, the real Sting, that he was part of turning or whatever like that. And that was it. And I was okay with that. I'm like, that's fine. I'll do whatever you want. I mean, I'm working for you. I'm under contract. So, I don't have a choice really. And so I did it and I think it was good and it went over. And then they said, hey, why don't we kind of keep this character on the part of the NWO. He can be part of the NWO, and we can bring him out and have him cause more, havoc and chaos. So that's kind of how it, I think, initially stayed on a little bit, and then I wrestled a few matches as NWO Sting in the U.S. But what happened, and this is the transition that you'll kind of like a little bit, Stanley, is that the during that time, so the NWO started getting really popular.
Hmm.
And we had a reciprocity with New Japan at the time. So some of the talent from New Japan, like Yuji Nagata and Nakanishi, and even Chono and Muda, they were coming over here to the U.S. Shono Muda were their big stars, and then some of the U.S. talent was going over to Japan. Scott Norton was already their IWGP Heavyweight Champion, so he had been over there for years. So there was this kind of reciprocity at that time. And when the NWO started getting popular, it went crazy in Japan, right? So they're all going, "Hey, we want the NWO here. We're going to do a big show, Tokyo Dome show." But the WCW at the time wasn't letting, the top NWO guys go over. They're not going to go over there and do a 3 week tour as the NWO. They might go over and do one shot, but Hogan and Savage and all those guys, not that they couldn't do it, obviously they've done it before, but they just weren't going to go over there and grind out a 3 week tour in Japan. It wasn't gonna happen. So they said, "Oh, you can take uh, NWO Sting. He's available. You can take Marcus Bagwell. He's available. You can take Mike Rotundo. He's available in the NWO. You can take Brian Adams. You could. There was guys that we started getting in the NWO that they said, hey." Scott Norton, of course, who was already a superstar in Japan, you can take him. So that became I was working, Scott and I were working over there nonstop, during the NWO stuff because we were there every single tour wrestling. I was wrestling as NWO Sting, which at first, I was kind of mimicking Sting, but later that character becomes its own character in Japan. I started painting my face different. I started doing different moves. I started coming up with a kind of a different style. Of course, yes, it's based on NWO Sting, but the Japanese people knew the difference between NWO Sting and the real Sting, which I was good because it was allowed me to do that character for years. I did end up while Steve was just hanging out in rafters, not doing anything. I was working every single night as NWO Sting in Japan.
And it's amazing that you were able to carve out your own legacy with a variation of that gimmick that people still talk about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was fortunate for me, and again, I was it was kind of right place, right time, if you will, for that, and then got the rub from the NWO. So once you get that, and then the rest of it, to be honest, I earned. So you have to go over there. If you weren't successful, believe me, they would have said, "Well, bring us another NWO person. We don't want this NWO Sting guy. He's stinking up the ring." So so the rest of it, I went over there and just by hard work and determination made that character over. And
Yes.
with a lot of help from New Japan, like I said, Masa Saito and Black Cat and everybody that was there, and Scott Norton and all these people that helped guide me. But I made that character into something that was at one point, and I brag about this some. They come out with a rating every year for gaijins, and they put, like Vader was one of the top. Scott is always at the top. Stan Hansen was at the top. And one year that they came out, I was number five. I think I was the fifth rated gaijin in the country, and Steve was like down the list, maybe 10 or 11 or whatever. So they knew the difference, in Japan. So that was a kind of a proud moment for me, the fact that I'd worked that hard on the character and I got some recognition. Not in the US, but that's fine.
Well, I think when people still come up to you, because I've seen you do a lot of convention appearances, people still come up to you at these different events. I mean, that's got to feel good. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Look, I kind of was in the, never, I was in the middle, territory, and I'm aware of that. It wasn't like I'm some disgruntled superstar that thought he should have had a bigger flame. I was happy to be in the business, happy to do the job, happy to be a part of it, happy to be, especially what I experienced because I really was with the old school guys and kind of learned through them and was part of them and then transitioned into the next level, not to where it is now, but I'm saying every wrestler probably thinks they had their golden years during their time, right? Whatever. But I'm saying, especially with the NWO and that run we had in Japan, for me, I'm so grateful to have been a part of that.
you've worked so many people over the course of your career. Who are some of your favorite opponents?
Well, I get this question a lot, and of course Eddie Guerrero is one that always comes up. Eddie was just a consummate professional, just an amazing talent. You can't really that's something you're in a way like born with, I mean, maybe because his family's all wrestlers, right? And he's second, third, whatever generation, and he watched it growing up. But guys like that, amazing. Flair, I think I did a match or two with Flair, not anything significant. Maybe it was a tag match with Arn, but Flair was another one in the ring. Bobby Eaton, you're talking about a guy that was just super talented, never got the stuff, but in the ring was just an amazing general and knew all of this stuff. There's lots of guys, the Japanese guys, I mean, working with Tenzan and Kojima, those guys, they were younger when we started, but just amazing talent. Those guys can do anything. And of course, Chono and Muda and all those guys that were the Fujinami and Choshu and Masa, just having those guys and being involved in those, and for me, I was fortunate to get in the ring with a lot of these people and learn. I mean, I wrestled Junkyard Dog a long time ago, and just having those guys to be mentors for me and learn from was a great experience. So, and I'm grateful that I really did. And I got, I was in All Japan. The first tag team match we did, Clark and I, we went to All Japan. And so we wrestled some of those guys, Abdul the Butcher, and I was on that flight when Terry Gordy and had the whole thing happen. Clark, that was our first match. It was in 1993. It was our first tour in Japan. A lot of those guys, unfortunately, have passed away. But, going there and having that and seeing those guys, just an incredible ride.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like that camaraderie, being with so many people, bumping into people that you grew up watching or just being around them in general, just
Yeah.
getting to meet so many of these people that you watched on television and meeting them in person and just networking. And I mean, that's just the name of the game, really, is just trying to network and trying to meet people and becoming friends with them. I mean, it really seems like it's a family.
It's definitely a family. And Scott and I talk about this all the time. As a pro wrestler, you're kind of in a unique it's a unique occupation or field to be in, and it's hard to for people to understand the bond between wrestlers. It's very strong. It's kind of like I equate it. It's not, and I would never say it's like going to war or anything like that. The bond soldiers have where you're looking out for someone's life. But in wrestling, you're looking out for the person you're working with, right? You're responsible. I'm responsible to not hurt you, right? And you're responsible to not hurt me. And it doesn't always go that way, and everybody can have beefs and things happen, but I'm saying it is like a very unusual bond that you have because of the closeness that you have to do to make a wrestling match and to do that. You have to it's not easy. And so there's a strong bond of that because you share the pain and the blood and the sweat and the tears. And there's not a lot of jobs where you have all of those things, And so it creates a very strong bond. And I think all the wrestlers, any wrestler you ask is going to tell you that there's a special bond between wrestlers.
Definitely. Let's switch gears and talk about some of the stuff you've done outside of wrestling. I know you've been involved with a lot of charity work over the years. What stuff can you tell me that you've done outside of the business to help out in your community?
Yeah, I mean, my brother, and we'll talk about this. My brother passed away 2 years ago, actually, and
Very sorry.
yeah, it's okay. I mean, it was terrible. He was my real hero and mentor for me, and he was a Harvard doctor. He was like a genius, and he went to Harvard Medical School, and he was a medical doctor, and he started this organization called Partners in Health, PIH. And he started this when he was young, and I supported him since he started. And I remember going to the first few meetings, and there was 4 or 5 people there, and it was embarrassing. But later there was hundreds of people, going to these things, thousands of people. So he really created a movement, pretty much with him and his friends, other doctors. Of course, it takes a team, and he's always had a good team. But I've been supportive of his organization since its inception, since it started. And I don't. I actually, it's a funny story because I've been with him on a lot of I've gone to Haiti and Africa and a lot of different countries. There's two ways that I traveled the world, and I'm grateful for both. One was wrestling. I got to travel, a lot of countries wrestling, Europe and Japan, India. And then I got to travel with my brother as a volunteer for his stuff. And I went to Africa and I went to Svalbard. That was a vacation. But just being able to travel with him and work on some of the projects has been just a joy for me to do. And I've been doing that since he started, and thankfully he took me along. And one of the things that happened when I got out of wrestling was that I went back to school and pursued a master's degree in public health. And I did that at the University of Miami, where I work today, because of him and because I said, I want to give back. I want to find a way to do something to give back to society and especially global health to the poorest of the poor communities and be able to do something. So that's what inspired me. And I went back and got my MPH and I've been involved in public health work, at the University of Miami and with Partners in Health still. And I want to do more. As I'm thinking, I'm older, of course, I'm thinking about retirement, and hopefully when I do that, I can focus more on helping and giving back, and that will be with Partners in Health and other similar you know, entities.
Was there a particular time, whether it was an event or just one of the trips that you had just mentioned, when you really felt like, man, I want to help these people? And
Yeah.
was there like a time
Yes.
where you recall maybe helping someone that just was just heartwarming for you?
Well, yeah, there is a time, and there was kind of so I was just going through a divorce, actually. So I was living in Atlanta. I just gotten divorced, and that's not a good feeling. I don't know if you're married, and hopefully, if you are, you don't get divorced. But and I was very down and distraught and depressed, and I just left Atlanta and I moved to Miami to my brother's house. So my brother said, "Please come here with me. Come stay here." And I didn't know what I was going to do. Really, I had gotten a real estate license, but hated real estate. So I kind of was at a square one, starting over. I wasn't going to wrestle. I could have gone to Japan more, but I didn't really want to. I was kind of hanging up the boots, which is very difficult to do. But and my brother said, "Come with me to Africa." And so I went with him on a trip to Rwanda, where they were just building a clinic in a little town called Ringwavu, which was outside of the capital's Kigali, and it was outside of the capital, probably an hour or so away. And it was nothing. It was a bombed out, place. And basically, my brother and his company, it's not a corporation, um, built a hospital in that area, a clinic and a hospital for there's about a 400,000, people that lived in that catchment area, and they had no access to health care. And I went as just a volunteer. And I remember telling him, he's like, I said, "What am I going to do?" I said, "I don't have any medical experience. How am I going to help? I'm just going to be sitting there watching." And he said, "Shut up and come with me." And I said, "All right." And so that's the turning point. That was a turning point for me to see all of the people, especially the people that were there, all the community, it was just such a groundswell of support to build this hospital and make something for everybody. And it changed my life. And I had been to Haiti and other places before, but this particular trip on this at this particular time, and when I was feeling bad about myself and woe is me, I said, "Hey, what am I complaining about? How can I possibly be upset when this is such a difficult, existence for these people that don't have access to medical care or clean water or healthy food?" It was just, it was one of those kind of cathartic things that happens in life where, again, I was feeling terrible, and then I totally came out of there with a whole new perspective and a new, just invigorated to make a difference and do something. And that's what spurred me. I mean, I hadn't been in school in 30 years, to go back to college at that late time, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get some training in this so that I can be more effective, so that I can do more instead of just helping." I mean, I did whatever, needed to be done, but to have, the skill set to help more and be more valuable to my brother, that's really why I went back and got a master's in public health. And so that was a big turning point.
Yeah, to see people that are just going through a rough time in their life, they don't have food, water, shelter. I mean, that's just devastating.
Yeah. Yeah, and it happens more than you think. I mean, we live in a place where we don't have the scarcity. I mean, I shouldn't say that. There's definitely places in the United States where, people are suffering and don't have enough to eat and don't have the proper resources they need. But we're not in a resource poor setting here in this country. We have access to everything. And if you go to countries where they don't, it's eye-opening, and you see the effects of that, it's just can be terrible, with not having prenatal care and having any kind of birth, surgeries or even, supply of blood or antibiotics, all of those things that are crucial, they don't have them, don't have access to them, and people die. And it's unnecessary in this century to have the technology and the ability we have in medicine to save lives and to just not even be aware of it or even know about it or do anything about it is pretty atrocious. So seeing that changes you and makes you different, and then you feel, hey, I need to do something, and of course, my brother was the a leader and a stalwart in this whole thing, and I'm not going to be that, and I know that, but I'm going to try to do my part if I can. So that's kind of where I am.
What made you want to pursue the medical field?
Um, that's the answer. Just being, I mean, I was around it with him a lot, and I never wanted to be a doctor. I don't think I had the mental ability to be a doctor. And but I was around a lot of doctors and around him and around his colleagues. So seeing that and being around that, there's a certain amount of, I don't know, information that rubs off, or you're just surrounded enough. I started using some of the vernacular that they use in global health, and I'd hear things and I'm like, oh, I know what that is. Oh, I was here for that. I remember when that happened. So you pick up all of this stuff if you pay attention. And then later, when I said I'm going to get this medical, training as a master's in public health, I was far ahead of some of the colleagues that were there because I'd been to these programs, I had been to these places already for years. And so they are young students and they're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as they say, but they hadn't had any boots on the ground experience. And so I had that. I didn't have the academic part, but I had the experience part. So being able to use that and then go back to school and get the academic side of it was a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, when you get your degree, what's your goal? Do you want to work with kids? Do you want to work with adults?
You
Where do you
know, it's a good question, and there's so many things you can do with a master's in public health. I kind of like some of the emergency preparedness stuff, disasters. I live in Miami. There's always hurricanes. The Caribbean and Haiti and those places get hit hard all the time, and they don't have the infrastructure or the federal dollars or whatever it is, the government, money to fix things. So there's a lot of need right here close to where I am. And I think that's an area where I'd like to, focus more on in the future. It's kind of disaster relief and disaster preparedness type things,
Yes.
especially as to medical care and medical, places.
What is it about giving back to the community that is just gives you the most joy, and why do you feel passionate?
Well, I mean, I think anytime you can give back or help someone, it helps you, it makes you feel better, right? I think that's why we're here. If you talk about, why are we on the planet? I think it's to love and care for other people, and that's one of the most important things you can do. Have compassion, have empathy and care. And, if you have the ability to do that, not everybody does, but if you can, I mean, everybody can do it to a certain extent, but if you're in a position where you can help people, in my opinion, there's nothing better than being able to help and give back. I think it's a part of humanity, hopefully, and a part of the reason why everybody's here. It's not just to get material things, and those things all go away, and you can't take them with you. But things that if you influence people and inspire people and help people and lift them up, they're going to remember that. They're not going to remember that you gave them something, but they're going to remember that you what you did for them.
I like that. I like that very much. Well, this has been wonderful. So much to talk with you and been wonderful getting the chance to speak with you.
Sure.
Jeff, I want to say thank you for coming on the show. It means a lot to me and to my listeners and viewers that are watching this on YouTube. Where can people find out more about you on
You know,
social media or to get in
yeah,
touch?
it's funny. I get this all the time too. I encourage you to look at the Partners in Health if you want to find a charity that really does the work and that really puts the dollars. I mean, I have a sister that works for the Red Cross, which is another great organization. She's amazing. She does amazing work with them, and the Red Cross does amazing job. Partners in Health also, that again, that's a place where I challenge you to just look it up if you get a chance and see what they're doing and the effect they're having on the lives of so many millions of people. And it's amazing and it will really humble you. So I don't personally have anything that I'm pushing or anything like that. I'm just happy to be, a part of this organization, Partners in Health, and do what I can for them. But, yeah, I recommend you to take a second to just look them up and see a little bit about them and then make a decision yourself.
Excellent. Jeff, thanks again, and you're more than welcome to come back.
All right, Stanley, thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right, bye.
This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.